On the night the wall broke open, the house exhaled a secret it had kept for 30 years. The storm claws at the windows, thunder rolls over Thornfield House like artillery. In the ruined study, Griffin raises a sledgehammer and smashes through a mahogany bookcase older than memory itself. Dust bursts into the air, then comes the cold breath from inside the wall. Not decay, not ruin, something preserved. A steel door waits in the dark, slightly open, with a spiral staircase falling into blackness. Behind Griffin, Lowen stands frozen in white plaster dust. In front of him is not a room, but a grave, a confession, and the first step toward revenge.
When a wall is finally breached, what emerges is not merely dust, but the suffocating weight of a 30-year betrayal. We are introduced to Griffin Calloway, 36 years old, a phantom legend in the criminal hierarchy. He governs the entire East Coast underworld from behind the veil of a legitimate enterprise, a man accountable to no one. The sole figure who commanded his respect was his grandfather Henry, the patriarch who forged this dynasty. But Henry has been deceased for 3 decades, officially due to heart failure, a narrative Griffin never accepted. So when the ancestral mansion is seized for a paltry $120,000 in tax arrears, he acquires it instantly. His investment was not in real estate. He knew the truth of his grandfather's end was entombed within its decaying structure, the unforeseen variable. A woman had taken refuge inside. Her name is Lowen Price, 27, dispossessed and residing in a dilapidated pickup truck. She was once a gifted architecture student, but her mother's medical expenses extinguished her future. For weeks, she had occupied the mansion, absorbing its secrets. Thus, when Griffin's enforcer finds her and raises a weapon, she doesn't react. She meets the gaze of the East Coast's most dangerous man with an unnerving stillness. And it is this very stillness that forces his hand to pause. That singular pause would irrevocably alter the narrative, for her trained eye is the key to a hidden cache. $40 million and a revelation that will dismantle his world. Griffin instructs his subordinate Perry to stand down, but the enforcer's aim remains fixed on Lowen, his finger poised on the trigger, awaiting the order to erase this new complication. Perry argues that she is a liability, a witness to their faces and the location itself. Yet Griffin's attention is entirely captivated by Lowen. She does not plead or rationalize. He has navigated the full spectrum of human response, the groveling of cowards, the deceptions of liars. Lowen's silence, however, is a foreign language. It is not the sound of surrender, but the profound quiet of a soul that has already reached its lowest point and possesses no fear to spare. "She stays," Griffin declares in a low tone. Perry begins to protest, but Griffin simply turns away. In their brutal calculus, the turning of a leader's back signifies the end of all debate. It is then Lowen finally speaks. "I don't take charity." Griffin pauses, his back still to her. "I'm not offering any," he replies. "You know this building. I need you to prevent it from collapsing. You provide your labor. You receive shelter. That is the extent of our arrangement." In that moment, a pact is forged, built not on trust, but on a shared, unyielding stubbornness. That evening, while Perry and 2 of Griffin's men establish a presence downstairs, Lowen returns to her space on the 2nd floor. Her existence is distilled to a blanket, some water, and a sketchbook she protects with fierce devotion. At night, the mansion's atmosphere becomes oppressive. The wind wails through its frame and the stairs groan. The house itself seems a living, breathing entity of decay. The scent of rot is pervasive, clinging to fabric and skin as if the structure itself seeks to consume its inhabitants. Furniture draped in sheets stands like an assembly of shrouded figures awaiting a silent command. Sleep eludes Griffin. He patrols the corridors with a flashlight, his beam tracing over peeling paint and the void-like spaces where portraits once hung. And then, he stops. Suspended from a single rusted nail is an old black and white photograph, nearly obscured by layers of filth. As he cleans the surface, an image resolves into focus. It is a younger Henry, his grandfather, impeccably dressed. In his arms, a small child of perhaps 5 or 6 years old laughs, clinging to his neck. It is Griffin himself. He simply stares, his fingers tracing the glass over his grandfather's face, attempting to bridge a 30-year chasm of silence. No words are spoken, but the image articulates everything. It reveals why the East Coast's most powerful figure abandoned all else for a forgotten, derelict mansion. The subsequent 3 days yield nothing. Griffin's 4-man team systematically deconstructs the house, from its grim basement to the dust-choked attic. They pry open sealed drawers and shatter aged cabinetry, only to find nothing of value. It seems the old family rumors were accurate. Henry had liquidated his assets before his death, squandering his fortune on speculative ventures that left him destitute. The prevailing story was that he died alone and penniless in a squalid motel room. Perry, Griffin's lieutenant, continually voices his doubt. "There is nothing here, boss. We are pursuing ghosts." Griffin, however, remains resolute. While his crew dismantles the interior, Lowen occupies a separate reality upstairs. She moves through the mansion with her sketchbook, sounding walls and examining beams, conducting a forensic architectural analysis. She maintains a deliberate distance from the men, a silent boundary that no one attempts to breach. Yet that boundary is crossed on 2 occasions. The first occurs around 2 a.m. on the second night. Insomnia, a relic from his time as a 17-year-old street soldier where deep sleep was a fatal indulgence, drives Griffin upstairs. He sees light from beneath a door and enters without announcement. He finds Lowen on the floor, sketching by candlelight. Her pencil moves with an absolute, unwavering confidence. Griffin glances at her sketchbook and understands. This is no mere drawing. It is a complete architectural cross-section of the floor, detailing every pipe and joist within the walls, rendered entirely from memory. Lowen simply returns his gaze, showing neither fear nor shame. For a brief instant, Griffin sees not a homeless woman, but a brilliant architect, discarded by the world. He departs without a word, the image seared into his mind. The second crossing occurred the following day. While inspecting a ceiling downstairs, Lowen overhears Griffin's phone conversation from an adjacent room. The voice is not that of the dispassionate man who granted her sanctuary. This voice is glacial, each word a calibrated threat. He is saying, "Inform Vance his excuses are irrelevant. He has a debt. He has until Friday. If the payment is not received by Saturday, his financial problems, along with all his other problems, will be permanently resolved." Lowen stands frozen in the hallway, experiencing for the first time a chill that has nothing to do with the old house. The dread that settles upon her is not for herself. She is long past self-preservation. It is the stark recognition that the man offering her shelter, the same man who observed her work at 2 a.m, is capable of extinguishing a life with the casual indifference of placing in order. She remains, but now she perceives the chasm between them not as mere distance, but as a void of survival. That afternoon, while Griffin examines blueprints, Perry receives a call and steps out onto the porch. He studies the screen, hesitates, then moves away from the door. He positions himself by the side of the house where the stone walls will obscure his voice, speaking in a low murmur with his back to the building. Griffin looks up from the plans just as Perry ends the call and turns. For a fraction of a second, their eyes meet. Perry says nothing. Griffin asks nothing. But in that silent exchange, something between them has fractured. On her fourth day, Lowen knocks at the door of Griffin's first-floor room, a first for her. Her expression is shattered, a stark contrast to her usual composure. The quiet resolve is gone, replaced by a restrained chaos, as if she has witnessed something inexplicable. "You need to come upstairs," she urges. "There was a room I couldn't access. The door was jammed. I just forced it open." Griffin ascends the stairs with her, Perry falling into step behind them. The room is at the end of the second-floor east wing. Its heavy oak door hangs broken from its hinges, forced open by Lowen's crowbar. The moment Griffin crosses the threshold, he understands her urgency. It was once a study. To say it used to be a study is a profound understatement. Whatever its function 30 years ago, it now resembles the aftermath of a detonation. Books have been systematically destroyed, their spines broken, their pages carpeting the floor in a layer so thick it obscures the rug beneath. The wall shelves are splintered, looking like a jaw with half its teeth missing. But this was not random vandalism. The destruction was methodical, executed book by book, as if someone had been searching every page for a hidden object. They failed because what they sought was not in the books. It was on the desk. A vast walnut desk sits beneath a boarded window, bearing a stack of dust-laden ledgers. When Griffin touches one, his fingerprints leave a clear impression in the grime. He blows the dust away and opens it to the first page. It is his grandfather Henry's script. Though faded, the precise, chilling lines are legible. This is no diary. It is a procurement list for a fortress. March 7th, 4,000 pounds of steel beams, delivered at 2 a.m. April 12th, 2 industrial diesel generators purchased with cash. August 9th, custom ventilation system installed. A final entry follows. Contractor became inquisitive. Contract terminated. Griffin turns page after page, his expression hardening. The entries span from 1988 to 1993, 5 years of covertly acquiring military-grade equipment worth millions. Steel, generators, blast doors. His grandfather had secretly transformed this house into a stronghold while the family dismissed him as mentally unstable. Griffin looks up, his gaze sweeping across the ruined study into the hall toward the floor. For 3 days he has been searching this house. There is no evidence of it. No steel reinforcements, no power sources. Only the decaying filigree of rusted vents. 4,000 pounds of steel, industrial generators, volumes of concrete. The material history had simply vanished. Lowen remains framed at the doorway, observing him. She understands that with a man like this, quietude is the key that unlocks testimony. Perry moves nearer, peering at the ledger over Griffin's shoulder with a dismissive shrug, a gesture that says, "You see, the patriarch was unbalanced. A man who acquired military surplus only to let it decay, a monument to his own paranoia." Griffin offers no response. He turns to the final page. The calligraphy is profoundly altered. The script has lost its measured precision. It is now a volatile, hurried scrawl, the mark of a mind besieged by terror. "They're coming. The hounds are closing in. The gallery is sealed." A strategy emerges from the panic. Let them think I'm crazy. Let them think I'm broke. And then, the key. The hollow wall holds the truth. Griffin absorbs the passage once, then again. His fingers trace the unsteady script, as if to touch the echo of his grandfather's panic from 3 decades prior. And in that moment, the narrative undergoes a tectonic shift. Henry Calloway was not succumbing to madness. He was not a paranoid fool. He had constructed something within the architecture of this house, a secret that required 4,000 pounds of steel and a self-sufficient power grid for its preservation. And its concealment was so masterful that it lay dormant for 3 decades. He was in flight from an unnamed pursuer. Who were they? What were these hounds? And where within the sprawling ruin was the hollow wall? Griffin closes the ledger with the reverence one affords an explosive device. His gaze meets Lowen's, his curiosity now transformed into a tangible need. "You've been diagramming this house for weeks," he states. "Have you found any architectural inconsistencies? A wall of unusual thickness, a space that defies the blueprints?" Lowen hesitates. Her gaze moves from his face to the book and back again. "Not yet," she replies, "but now I have a precise understanding of what to search for." The next morning, as Griffin stands on the porch with his coffee, he registers the sound of crunching gravel. The acoustics are wrong. The approach to Thornfield is so ravaged that vehicles are forced to a crawl. But this sound is fluid, powerful, like a creature for whom obstacles are an irrelevance. A black Bentley Continental emerges, its polished surface reflecting the forest as it glides down the muddy track. A diamond adrift in a sewer. The vehicle halts. The driver exits to open his passenger door. A man of approximately 62 years emerges. His silver hair is a perfect sculpted helmet. A bespoke 3-piece gray suit clings to him like a second skin. He eyes the mud with contempt before ascending to the porch. Yet, the first detail Griffin registers is not the suit or the car. It is the smile. It is broad, confident, a performance of affability enacted solely by the mouth. His eyes are glacial, and they survey the mansion with an expression Griffin recognizes from his own reflection. It is the look of hunger. "Griffin Calloway," the man says, his voice like polished stone, extending a business card so dense it feels like a small plate of armor. "Warren Ashford of Ashford and Crane Holdings. I've been shaping this valley for over 30 years. This property has long been on my radar." Griffin accepts the card but does not read it, merely holding it between his fingers. "What is it you want?" "Direct. I appreciate that." Warren steps fully onto the porch, his eyes still consuming the mansion. "I am aware you just acquired Thornfield. I am also aware you paid over $120,000 in arrears to prevent its seizure. Mr. Calloway, this estate is a fiscal abyss. The roof is compromised, the foundation is failing, and the electrical system belongs to a bygone era. My interest lies solely in the land. 12 acres with this vista. The potential is significant. I am prepared to offer $2 million cash. You sign the deed, and you realize a 15-fold return on your investment in under a week. All parties are satisfied." Griffin sips his coffee. $2 million is a trivial sum to him, less than a single quarter's earnings from one of his illicit ventures. But he does not decline. He simply listens. In his world, a world where a single misspoken word can be a death sentence, silence is a tool of interrogation. An opponent met with quiet will invariably reveal their own strategy. And in his very next statement, Warren Ashford exposes his true motive. "In truth, the house requires demolition regardless," Warren continues, his tone silken, but his eyes flicker down to the foundation for a microsecond. A typical observer would miss the tell. Griffin is not a typical observer. "It's regrettable, but the sub-basement experienced a catastrophic flood back in the 1990s. The entire foundation is compromised. It would require heavy machinery just to stabilize the ground before new construction. Griffin's expression remained a mask of stoicism. Internally, a cold certainty was beginning to form. He had just reviewed the original architectural plans the previous night. Lowen herself had spent 3 weeks mapping every structural element of this place. Those blueprints never depicted a sub-basement. The house was built on unstable, low-grade land. Any such excavation would have been a structural impossibility. There was no flood. The foundation was sound. Warren Ashford was constructing an elaborate fiction, a narrative that orbited a single crucial point: the empty space beneath the house, the precise location where 4,000 pounds of steel and 2 industrial generators had disappeared 3 decades ago. He knew this man possessed knowledge of something concealed there, and he had come to claim it. "I will consider it," Griffin said, his voice so devoid of inflection that it betrayed nothing, even to Perry. For a moment Warren stared, and for the first time the polished smile disintegrated. The facade fell away, revealing a predator in a tailored suit. "Do not mistake me for a fool, Calloway." Warren's voice descended into a rougher, more threatening timbre. "Your grandfather attempted the same stratagem, and we are all aware of how that concluded for him." He turns, descends the porch, and enters his vehicle. The Bentley accelerates away, consumed by the trees. Griffin stood motionless, his coffee now cold. Perry approached. "Give the order, boss." But Griffin remained silent. He was replaying Warren's final pronouncement, a critical narrative pivot. "Your grandfather tried this game." This was not a commercial warning. It was the boast of a killer. Warren Ashford knew the precise circumstances of Henry Calloway's death because his family had orchestrated it. For 30 years, this suspicion had been a persistent irritant in Griffin's life. Now, standing in the same porch where his grandfather once held him, that irritant had been given a name. That night, a storm materialized with primal violence. The atmosphere had been oppressive, and by 8, black clouds had consumed the sky. Thunder detonated like distant artillery, and the rain fell in a solid, percussive sheet against the compromised roof. The mansion groaned under the assault, the death rattle of a great beast. Wind howled through the boarded windows with a spectral voice. Upstairs, a door began to slam in a repetitive, frantic rhythm, the deranged heartbeat of the house itself. Perry and his men attempted to rest on the ground floor. Griffin did not. He sat in the ruined study, his grandfather's journal open, his flashlight focused on one definitive line. "The hollow wall will keep the truth." He registered her approach before she became visible. Lowen appeared in the doorway, her hair damp from a leak, clutching a sketchbook like a talisman. "I can't sleep," she stated, an acknowledgement of their shared vigil. Griffin offered no invitation, nor any dismissal. She entered, settled on the floor, and leaned against a desk. They remained in the quiet, enveloped by the storm's external chaos. 2 figures in a ruined chamber where the silence was more profound than any conversation. Then Griffin spoke, his voice a low counterpoint to the rain. "My grandfather made this house into a stronghold. 4,000 pounds of steel, massive generators. He knew they were pursuing him. And he died nonetheless." He paused. "A man visited today. He desired the house. He fabricated a story about the foundation, and then he spoke of my grandfather with the intimacy of one who understands how a man is eliminated. He offered no name, no mention of the 30-year vendetta. He provided just enough narrative for her to comprehend the stakes. This was not a property dispute. It was a tomb, and an intruder was attempting a desecration before Griffin could uncover the secret his grandfather had interred. Lowen listened, then opened her sketchbook. "The hollow wall," she whispered. "It must be found." It was a declaration, not a query. "If he concealed something within the walls," she continued, turning to a rendering of the second floor, "I can locate it, but I need to remeasure." She rose, tape measure in hand, and moved toward the hall. Griffin followed. Lowen measured the corridor from end to end, the tape pulled taut. 45 feet. She then entered the study, which shared a wall with the hall, and measured its interior length. 39 feet. She met his gaze. 6 feet, she said. "There is a 6-foot discrepancy between this wall and the one in the corridor." She approached the north wall, obscured by an immense bookshelf, and rapped on its wooden frame, then on the plaster beside it. The acoustics were entirely dissimilar. "This is not merely furniture," she announced. "It is integrated into the wall. The entire structure is part of the house. One only employs such a technique to conceal the wall itself. Behind this, there is a 6-foot void that exists on no blueprint." Griffin's gaze shifted from the monumental bookcase to the sledgehammer he had purchased, which rested in the corner. It was a beautiful antique fixture, perhaps the last object of grace remaining in the entire decaying structure. Doubt warred with resolve, a futile act of demolition against the phantom of Warren Ashford. His words, a spectral echo, "Your grandfather tried this game," became the catalyst. Griffin raised the sledgehammer, its cold mass a counterweight to his fury. The first impact was a sonic fracture, a detonation that shattered the room's stillness. Splintered wood rained down. With each successive, desperate swing, he carved a path through the facade, his exhaustion irrelevant until a relic of the past emerged, a faded floral wallpaper. The hammer pierced the plaster, releasing a suffocating plume of forgotten history. A crowbar became the key, its prying leverage met with the shriek of protesting nails. And then the exhale. Not the mansion's familiar decay, but a rush of sterile, cold atmosphere. This was the scent of a space hermetically sealed for 3 decades. Through the settling dust, Griffin aimed his flashlight into the newly formed aperture, a gateway into a preserved past. The flashlight beam found not decay, but perfection. A reinforced steel door, immaculate and untouched, stood agape by a mere inch. It guarded a spiraling iron descent into an absolute lightless chasm. Lowen stood beside him, her dust-caked face a mask of awe, her gaze fixed on the void. Their silence was punctuated by a crack of thunder from the world outside. Here they were, 2 figures on the precipice of an abyss constructed 30 years ago by Henry Calloway, a chasm engineered for this very revelation. Crossing the threshold, Griffin felt a profound cold ascend from the first step on the spiral staircase. The staircase, dormant for 3 decades, offered no sign of decay. Its stability was absolute, as if existing outside of time itself. His light beam plunged into the darkness, only to be consumed by it. Lowen materialized in the opening, her declaration, "I'm going with you." An undeniable statement of fact. Griffin offered no protest. The descent was a journey through layers of isolation. 10 steps down, the air transitioned from musty to the sterile cold of a vault. At 20 steps, the brick gave way to polished bedrock, chilling to the touch. The 80-step spiral concluded on a concrete platform. There, Griffin confronted an object of legend, a blast door. This was no mere cellar. It was a Cold War artifact forged from thick steel, engineered to withstand apocalypse. A thin black line marked the door's opening. Griffin leveraged the crowbar with his full body weight. The hinges screamed in protest, a piercing shriek that resonated up the stairwell. The door yielded with a groan, revealing a profound darkness within, a void untouched by light. Griffin's beams sliced into the black, illuminating colossal forms. Tucked in a corner was an immense, army green apparatus, its exhaust system venting directly into the ceiling above. It was the Caterpillar diesel generator, precisely as the ledger foretold. Lead-lined, acquired off the books. Adjacent stood a gray electrical panel, its main breaker disengaged. From it, monstrously thick cables snaked from the generator across the ceiling, like metallic veins. Griffin confronted the panel, a device dormant for 30 years. He gripped the breaker, inhaled, and thrust it upward. An eternity passed in the subsequent second of absolute deafening silence, broken only by the sound of his own pulse and Lowen's breath. A deep vibration began, resonating from the floor into his very bones. The caterpillar coughed once, then twice, before erupting into a deafening roar, the sound of a titan waking from a 30-year slumber. The lights overhead ignited not in unison, but sequentially. Click, click, click. Each fixture hummed with latent power. A sterile white light bled into every corner, exposing the staggering scale of the construction. Griffin's flashlight fell from his hand. He stood within a colossal subterranean vault, a sarcophagus of concrete and steel. The ceiling soared over 10 feet high, above a floor of mirror-polished concrete. A subtle hum from the walls betrayed a ventilation system, impossibly functional after 3 decades, circulating cool, dry air. A mahogany conference table occupied the center, a starkly incongruous artifact of civilization in this subterranean fortress. Along one wall stood 6 Mosler safes, monolithic in their construction, their thick steel impervious. But it was the far wall that commanded attention. A vast corkboard, a sprawling tapestry of documents and photos, all interconnected by a frenetic web of red string. Each thread represented a nexus, and each nexus formed a part of the secret narrative Henry Calloway composed in his final, isolated years. Griffin pivoted, his gaze sweeping from the safes to the board, absorbing the totality of the scene. His grandfather was not destitute. He was not mad. His paranoia was a rational response to an unseen threat. Henry had transmuted his entire fortune into this subterranean sanctuary, a time capsule waiting for a descendant to unearth the truth. Approaching the board, Griffin felt the foundations of his family history fracture. The focal point was a large black and white photograph of 2 men before a familiar Poughkeepsie office building. The younger was Warren Ashford, perhaps 30, his hair still dark. His smile was a precise echo of the one Griffin had faced hours before, expansive yet devoid of warmth. Beside him, an older, more formidable iteration of Warren, sharing the same rigid jawline and chilling eyes. Beneath a name in Henry's red ink, Conrad Ashford. From the photograph, red strings radiated like arteries from a corrupted heart. Griffin traced their paths. The first terminated at a collection of copied bank transfers from the Cayman Islands, detailing the siphoning of hundreds of thousands from accounts bearing Henry Calloway's name. The signatures, however, were crude forgeries. A second thread connected to contracts liquidating assets, property, stocks, mineral rights, all bearing the same forged signature, and funneled into a shell corporation which, 4 layers deep, resolved into Ashford and Crane Holdings. The family fortune had not been liquidated. It had been systematically plundered through forgery during Henry's lifetime. A third string led to a report on the Ashford Creek Dam, a 1987 Ashford and Crane project. Concealed within was an inspection finding. The contractor had dangerously compromised on steel and waterproofing to inflate profits, creating a catastrophic risk that was ignored. But the final thread caused Griffin to brace himself against the table. It led to a slender medical file, each page feeling impossibly heavy. It contained Henry's private blood analysis from a Connecticut lab, dated 3 months before his death. The analysis revealed a lethal concentration of digitalis in Henry's system. Not from a prescription, he had no cardiac condition, but from an external source. Derived from the foxglove plant, digitalis induces a slow, erratic heartbeat when administered incrementally, culminating in heart failure. In the early 1990s, an autopsy would miss such a subtle poisoning, attributing death to natural causes. Henry Calloway was not a victim of heart failure. He was the subject of a protracted, methodical murder, a murder he was aware of as it unfolded. By the time he understood the plot, his body was too compromised to resist, affording him only the strength to document the crime and construct this sanctuary, his final hope vested in a future Calloway. Griffin was unaware of his own trembling until Lowen's hand rested on his shoulder. Her touch was a warm, silent anchor. He remained frozen, his knuckles bloodless against the table, his breathing labored. In that instant, the formidable figure of the East Coast underworld became a child again, experiencing the loss of his grandfather for a second time. "My grandfather, they murdered him," he breathed, the words fractured and hollow. It was a statement made not to Lowen, but to the room, to Henry's memory, to 30 years of silence. Composing himself, he moved to the safes. 5 were sealed by time, but the 6th and smallest was slightly ajar. Within rested a pristine leather briefcase. Atop it sat an envelope, addressed in familiar ink. "For the last of the Calloway line." His hand shaking, Griffin broke the seal. The script was Henry's, yet imbued with a final, defiant strength. "When you read this, I am gone, and the scavengers have gathered." It was Conrad Ashford who administered the poison. "My son Marshall lacks the fortitude and possesses too much trust to recognize this treachery. The Empire, however, is not lost. I have merely rendered it invisible. The briefcase contains $40 million in untraceable bearer bonds, all from before 1982. If you hold them, you own them. With them is the microfiche, the only original proof. It has the medical files, the money transfers, the fake contracts, the damn report, everything you need to destroy the Ashford name for generations. For 30 years, they have been hunting for this proof. They will come to this house." His posthumous warning was a covenant of paranoia. Griffin unveiled the artifacts. $40 million in phantom bonds and a single frame of damning truth. Yet Lowen's gaze met his, not the fortune. In the bunker's glare, 50 feet down, their shared look became a silent, unbreakable contract. In that instant, their reality fractured. A crash from above, muted by 30 iron steps and stone, signaled the world's intrusion. The manor's front door was breached. Griffin's survival instinct, a tool honed over 20 years, ignited. He turned to dusty security screens, dormant relics of a paranoid past, and powered them on. The monitors sparked to life, displaying grainy images from Henry's 3-decade-old network. The main screen revealed the hall, and with it, a chilling tableau. In the center stood Warren Ashford, his immaculate suit defying the storm. He surveyed the space like a monarch reclaiming his throne after 30 years. Flanking him were 2 men in black coats, while a third emerged, a lanky figure in leather whose bald head gleamed. He moved with a predator's deliberate grace. It was Bones. The name was a legend on the East Coast. Floyd Bones Keegan was more than Ashford's enforcer. He was an artist of despair. Yet it was the fifth man who paralyzed Griffin, a figure moving with a swagger Griffin himself had taught him. Perry. Perry Langston stood beside the master, a subordinate reporting to his true commander. His words were a clinical echo of their briefings, devoid of duress. He'll seek what the old man hid. It's just a matter of time. Warren's nod was a slow, ominous sentence. Find him. Erase him and everything he knows. Stage a collapse, then burn the house. The storm provides perfect cover. Griffin saw the screen, but his mind was lost 18 years in the past, discovering a desperate Perry on a Boston street. In that desperation, Griffin, only 3 years into his own power, had seen loyalty, a fatal misreading of character. He had given Perry his complete trust, a currency the man had now spent. That furtive call on the terrace, a crack in the glass he had dismissed, was a catastrophic misjudgment. Griffin! Lowen's voice was a blade through his reverie. We have to move, now! She pulled him back from the precipice of memory, her pragmatism recognizing that stillness was a self-inflicted execution. On the monitor, Bones ascended. His flashlight beam pierced the study's gloom, illuminating the void where the bookcase had stood. Griffin witnessed the precise moment of comprehension. Bones pivoted, his voice a roar that cascaded down the stairs. He's here! There's a passage below! The thunder of boots on floorboards above was followed by the clang of feet on the spiral staircase. The hunt had come to them. Griffin seized the briefcase. Lowen, anticipating the need, secured the box of microfiche inside her coat. He then lunged for the generator for the great green-painted iron lever. Green key locks the exit. He threw his weight against it. A piercing siren assaulted the bunker, forcing Lowen to cover her ears. A hidden steel plate slammed shut above as the blast door sealed below, turning the stairwell into a tomb. A bullet ricocheted off the steel, its shriek a violent slash of sound as sparks showered the hall. Griffin shielded Lowen with his body, a primal instinct to protect the one person left who mattered. With a deafening boom, the blast door met its frame. Heavy, echoing clunks signified the automated bolts shooting home, locking them in. Then only silence, punctuated by the faint, useless banging from the other side. They crouched behind the table, breathing in the acrid scent of gunpowder. They were safe, yet interred 50 feet underground in a concrete vault. As he helped Lowen up, the door's impact still ringing in his ears, he understood their new condition. The desperate hammering from outside was already fading, becoming as meaningless as distant thunder. While their enemies were caged, so were they, awaiting the final gambit of Henry's design. A red wheel opens the passage. Griffin ran to the bunker's rear wall, past a corkboard webbed with red string. There it was, a thick steel pipe emerging from the concrete, capped with a massive red cast iron valve wheel. 30 years of rust had fused it solid. He strained, muscles cording in his neck, but the iron was immovable. Together, Lowen was beside him, her hands finding a grip on the opposite side. She intuited the direction, counterclockwise. On 3, they pushed as one, his strength and her resolve combining against the rusted spokes. After a moment of resistance came a sharp crack, the sound of ancient bonds breaking. Rust flaked away as the wheel groaned into motion. The wall behind the board hissed, revealing itself not as a wall, but as a pressure-sealed door swinging inward to expose a perfect ancient blackness. The aroma of wet earth washed over them, a potent mix of decay, roots, and the sour metal of soaked clay. A tunnel hewn from bedrock and braced with steel stretched before them. It was a silent testament to Henry's obsessive foresight, a path leading from the grave back to the world. Griffin's light cut into a passage barely wide enough for one. He and Lowen exchanged a look of silent accord. She entered and he followed, moving into the earth's embrace. Griffin's light cast frantic shadows against the damp walls. The air, thick and ancient, made each breath a labor. Overhead beams groaned under the earth's weight. Lowen faltered, her foot catching on a root, and she fell. Griffin caught her arm, pulling her back up in a single fluid motion. He did not release her hand. It was the first touch, not born of necessity or command, but a simple affirmation that they were still alive. Their hands remained joined in the oppressive dark. Griffin's voice, when he spoke, was alien to him, stripped of its cold authority and softened by a vulnerability unseen in 20 years. "Thank you for remaining." Lowen's pace never faltered. A single firm squeeze was her reply, her steady voice echoing from the shadows. "Don't die, Calloway. You still owe me a house." The tunnel began its ascent, the ground shifting from damp earth to clinging mud as the air began to change. The raw scent of earth, a scent of confinement, yielded to the aroma of rain-soaked grass, the fragrance of the open world. Griffin's gaze lifted. A massive, reinforced stone slab served as the ceiling, artfully disguised as the carriage house floor, its release mechanism embedded in the steel frame. Releasing Lowen's hand, he placed his palms on the decaying timber and heaved. With a profound metallic groan, the slab pivoted upward as counterweights engaged, sweeping away decades of moss and soil in a single fluid motion. A gust of crisp, rain-washed night air surged in, a welcome and incredible embrace. He vaulted out, gripping the edge for leverage before extending a hand back to Lowen. They both fell to the sodden grass as rain streamed over their faces, struggling to regain their breath. For a moment they remained motionless, simply absorbing the sky, as if experiencing a second birth. Pushing himself up, Griffin surveyed their surroundings. They stood within the skeleton of a ruined carriage house on the periphery of the Thornfield estate. 3 stone walls endured, but the roof was absent, and the interior was so choked with vegetation one would never suspect what lay concealed beneath. Critically, a dirt track wound from the ruins toward the estate's main gate, where his vehicle was parked several hundred yards distant in the downpour. Griffin didn't sprint for it. He produced his phone, its screen already slick with rain, and dialed the one number he knew would connect. Even at 3 a.m. amidst a hurricane, Keats McGrath responded on the second ring. He posed no questions about the trouble or circumstances. He simply listened. Over 20 years, Keats had understood that when the boss calls at such an hour, inquiries are superfluous. "Thornfield House, Hudson Valley. I need 12 men, full operational gear." "Listen closely. Warren Ashford is inside with 4 associates, and Bones is among them." Griffin paused. "Perry was the informant. I require them to be breathing, Keats. All of them. Breathing and prepared to talk." A moment of raw astonishment passed over the line before Keats, the consummate professional, contained it. 45 minutes, he affirmed, and the connection ended. Griffin pocketed his device and returned to the carriage house. Lowen was huddled against a stone wall. drenched with a $40 million briefcase, caked in mud, resting between them. Within, the currency remained immaculate, sealed in plastic by a man 30 years deceased. They waited together in the gloom. The only sounds were the deluge striking the fractured structure and the rhythm of their own lungs. Then Griffin's voice sliced through the storm, not from a desire to speak, but because 3 decades of rigid containment had finally given way. The discovery in that bunker was the catalyst. "When I was 6, he began, "my grandfather had a photograph taken with me at Thornfield's entrance. On the back, he wrote, 'This dominion is built on blood, not currency. Defend it, son.' It was our final picture. 3 months later, he was dead." He fell silent, allowing the storm to fill the void. The official story was a heart attack. My father, the family, they all accepted it. I never did. It was just a feeling deep in my gut. But no one heeds a 6-year-old's intuition, and no one dares to question a grown man on the matter. I've carried that suspicion for 30 years. His gaze fixed on the mansion, a dark silhouette against the turbulent sky. Tonight, I unearthed the truth. My grandfather was poisoned. He knew his time was short. Instead of fleeing, he constructed a prison for the jackals responsible, burying the evidence deep enough for me to one day find. He gambled on my arrival. 30 years ago, he placed his trust in me, and tonight was the first occasion I truly honored that faith. His voice fractured at the final word, a minuscule crack, yet Lowen detected it. She remained still for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was a murmur directed at the darkness rather than at him. "My mother had lung cancer. It was stage 3 when diagnosed. I left Columbia to become her caregiver. 14 months. 14 months of sleeping in hospital chairs, subsisting on vending machine fare, hearing that damnable ventilator. Rhythmic noises still unsettle me." She drew her knees closer. On her final night, my mom was unable to speak. The machinery sustained her life, but she managed to squeeze my hand once before letting go. There were no tears. She possessed a terrifying serenity, the kind you witness in someone whose tears ran dry long ago. After her death, everything else vanished. The savings, our house, my education, all consumed by medical expenses. I never disclosed these things. People don't inquire, and vocalizing it changes nothing. A quiet settled between them. A crime lord and a homeless woman taking refuge in a derelict building during a storm, with a briefcase holding $40 million nearby. Neither glanced at it. The money had lost all significance. For the first time, neither was isolated in their suffering. There were no hollow platitudes, no "I understand" or "it will get better." They simply inhabited the darkness together, allowing another's presence to accomplish what words could not. 40 minutes later, headlights carved through the sheets of rain. 3 black SUVs navigated the muddy track. Keats McGrath, a formidable man with a red beard, emerged, trailed by 11 armed operators, assuming formation. Griffin met them, issued quiet directives, and within 10 minutes, Thornfield House was under complete lockdown. They located Warren, Bones, Perry, and the 2 mercenaries precisely where Griffin indicated, caught in a stone passage between 2 sealed doors, their rage spent and supplanted by absolute powerlessness. Keats's unit escorted them to the main floor and forced them to their knees, hands clasped behind their heads. Griffin entered the grand sitting room, a spectral space draped in dust sheets, and halted directly before Warren Ashford. The old man knelt, his expensive suit ruined, yet his eyes still radiated an icy defiance. Griffin merely looked down at him, perfectly still, with the tranquility a man finds only after traversing hell. 30 years ago, your father administered poison to my grandfather, Griffin stated, his voice as level as if discussing the weather. Digitalis, small increments over months. He disguised murder as a protracted illness, and nobody suspected a thing. Then you took what your father usurped and raised your empire from my family's ruin. You believed that secret was interred forever. Griffin opened the briefcase, extracted a small black metal case containing microfiche, and displayed it for Warren. You forgot my grandfather always had a contingency. The medical records, the illicit transfers, the fraudulent contracts, the damn report, it is all here. The original documents, everything the federal authorities require to dismantle Ashford and Crane Holdings in 48 hours. Warren's gaze locked onto the case, and for the first time that night, the icy resolve in his eyes wavered. Griffin did not surrender the evidence. He secured the microfiche reel in his private safe in Manhattan and dispatched 3 copies within 24 hours. The first was sent to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, enclosed with an anonymous letter detailing the entire conspiracy. The second arrived at the investigative desk of the New York Times, primed for a Pulitzer. The third copy was delivered to Orla Finch, Griffin's attorney, with explicit instructions. Should anything befall Griffin Calloway, a disappearance, a staged accident, or a sudden death, Orla was directed to release the complete dossier to every media outlet and law enforcement agency on the East Coast inside of an hour. It was a demonstration of power, not a plea for justice. He didn't have them arrested that night. He let the copies circulate, allowing them to agonize for 48 hours, compelling them to witness their world's collapse before the law arrived. Federal agents descended upon the Ashford and Crane headquarters in Poughkeepsie on a Tuesday morning, seizing servers, hard drives, and 43 boxes of records. 11 executives were led from their offices in handcuffs. Warren Ashford was apprehended at his residence that same morning. He was still dressed in a silk robe, coffee in hand, his expression utterly vacant as he faced 6 agents in tactical gear on his porch. Bones was captured 2 hours later in a motel, desperately attempting to erase his phone's data. The list of charges was extensive: conspiracy to commit murder, extortion, money laundering, 30 years of fraudulent activity, and public endangerment related to the dam project. The story became a media firestorm. The Hudson Valley's most prominent real estate empire was exposed as a criminal syndicate overnight. Griffin, however, was not watching the news. On the evening of Warren's arrest, he was seated in a discreet Italian restaurant in the West Village, the type of establishment with no sign, only candlelight and the aroma of basil. Griffin had Keats deliver the traitor to him, discreetly. This was not a reunion. It was a final accounting. Perry Langston sat opposite him, his posture erect, hands on the table, meeting Griffin's gaze directly. He made no attempt to flee. He offered no justifications. He understood better than anyone that in their world, flight and excuses were equally futile. Griffin consumed his pasta slowly, methodically, like a man with infinite time. He took a sip of wine, placed the glass down, and at last held Perry's gaze. And Perry, who had faced down adversaries for 18 years without flinching, was the first to look away. "Do you know what I despise the most, Perry?" Griffin inquired, his tone conversational. "It isn't the betrayal itself. Betrayal is elementary. High stakes and weak character produce it daily. What I find intolerable," he paused, rotating the wine glass, is that you genuinely believed I would remain ignorant. For 18 years, I instructed you in this game, and you still fundamentally misread me. That is the true insult. Griffin chose not to expend a bullet on Perry. Such an act would have been a mercy. Instead, as Perry consumed his final meal, Griffin engaged in his systematic erasure. By the time Perry emerged onto the street, his existence had been nullified. Financial accounts were irrevocably frozen. His syndicate phone was now a functionless piece of hardware. The Brooklyn apartment Griffin had provided was already being stripped by a disposal team. The final blow was a broadcast message to every figure from Boston to Miami. Perry Langston is a non-entity. To engage with him is to declare opposition to me. In their sphere, being eliminated implied you once held significance. But to be deleted entirely, to have one's calls go unanswered, to become a phantom on the streets, that is the true form of execution. Perry Langston departed that restaurant and simply ceased to exist within the East Coast's criminal ecosystem. A month later, the Hudson Valley was ablaze with the hues of autumn. The once impenetrable path to Thornfield House was now a pristine, graded road, bordered by great oaks shedding leaves of crimson and gold, effectively unfurling a new carpet for the season. And there, at the lane's conclusion, the mansion was no longer a skeletal ruin. It was undergoing a complete resurrection. The entirety of the East Wing was encased in steel scaffolding, where crews were meticulously setting new stone and mending the fractured roof. The boarded-up windows were gone, supplanted by new oak frames and panes of glass that invited sunlight inside for the first time in 3 decades. Even the front doors, once broken by Warren Ashford, had been replaced with immaculate substitutes, their brass fittings polished to a brilliant sheen. And orchestrating this revival, gesturing at blueprints, none other than Lowen Price. Yet, this was not the same woman Griffin had discovered cowering on the 2nd floor. Her incisive gaze remained, but her posture now conveyed a novel form of authority. It wasn't defiance, it was the quiet confidence of a person who understands they occupy their rightful place in the world. Griffin had entrusted her with the entire Thornfield restoration, provided her with a studio, and arranged for her return to Columbia to complete her degree that spring. Her tuition, notably, is funded by the Henry Callaway Scholarship, an endowment Griffin established for architecture students, named for his grandfather. For Griffin, a legacy is not a matter of prestige. It is an assurance that those who are deserving are never erased from memory. Griffin's solitary SUV approached. He emerged, foregoing his typical convoy of black vehicles, and simply absorbed the scene. Hands in his pockets, he observed the sun glinting off the scaffolding. For the first time, this place was not a mausoleum, it was reawakening. Lowen noticed him, concluded her discussion with her foreman, and crossed the grounds. She wore plaster dust in her hair, carried blueprints beneath her arm, and her boots were caked with mud. She came to a halt beside him, her gaze following his. "The roof will be finished in 2 weeks," she stated, her tone professional but laced with palpable pride. "The grand sitting room requires another 3 months. We're replacing all the antiquated wiring and plumbing. But the study..." She pivoted, a faint smile touching her lips. "I preserved the mark from the sledgehammer, instructed the painters to work around it. It serves as a monument." He met her gaze, and in their shared silence, no words were necessary. They both understood that scar was not mere damage. It was the fissure through which a secret 30 years contained could at last emerge into the light. Griffin produced the old black and white photograph from his pocket, the image of Henry Calloway holding him as a 6-year-old boy on these very steps. He entered the study, walked directly to where the hammer's gouge marked the wall like a scar of battle, and placed the photo on the new windowsill. It faced the sunlight striking the autumn foliage. "The void is filled, grandfather," Griffin murmured, his voice so quiet only the house could discern it. "And the house has its guardian." Lowen waited at the threshold, allowing them their moment. Then Griffin turned toward her, and for the first time in 30 years, the most formidable man on the East Coast genuinely smiled. This was not the smile of a crime lord. It was the expression of a man who had finally acquired the one thing $40 million and a criminal enterprise could not secure for him: tranquility. Lowen approached the window. She placed her hand over his in a simple, quiet gesture. It was the same way she had touched his shoulder in the bunker as his entire world was collapsing. This time, however, his world was not fracturing. It was being reassembled. They stood there together, observing the afternoon. The trees burned with color, leaves drifted on the wind, and Thornfield House was at last filled with the resonance of life. The narrative of Griffin and Lowen is fundamentally a story about walls. The physical wall Henry constructed for his secret, the psychological fortress Griffin erected around his heart, and the 6-year prison of poverty that confined Lowen. Each one required demolition for them to achieve liberation. The greatest treasures are not secured within a vault. Sometimes they are found by summoning the courage to take a hammer to one's own barriers, to confront a difficult truth, and to allow another person in when you believed you were destined to be alone forever. If this narrative resonated with you, I would be genuinely interested to know. Which element affected you most deeply? And have you ever needed to dismantle a wall in your own life, be it fear, grief, or your past, to discover what lay beyond it? Please share your story in the comments. I read every one, and it would be a privilege to hear yours. If you found value in this analysis, a like helps it reach a wider audience. Consider sharing it with a friend who might benefit from this message today. And if you are new to this channel, subscribe and activate notifications to join us for new explorations each day. To each and every one of you here, I extend my wishes for profound health, a life filled with joy, and a significant measure of inner peace. Thank you for accompanying me to the very end. I will sign off for now, and I look forward to seeing you in the next installment.